They called it a sacred pact, simple, unbreakable. But between 1931 and 1958, 7 people broke its rules. Each one died, alone, within a week. What was this pact? And why has no one dared to break it since? Would you stay in a village where the price of disobedience is death? Tell us in the comments. And if forgotten rituals and cursed histories haunt your curiosity, subscribe to Host of Silence now. To uncover the truth, we must return to the year the pact was sealed. 1893. Dunwallow, a name whispered more than spoken, clung to the desolate reaches of northern England like a forgotten secret. Its very existence, shrouded in perpetual mist and hemmed by unforgiving moors, felt like an anomaly, a place stubbornly resisting the march of time. The year was 1893, and within its ancient, stone-walled confines, life moved with a quiet, almost reverent caution, a rhythm dictated by an unseen, unspoken force. The village harbored an enigma, a pervasive awareness of something profound and ancient stirring beneath its very foundations. It was this profound awareness that had, decades prior, compelled 6 figures of unique insight and resolve to forge a protective barrier around their community. These were the founding elders, pillars upon which Dunwallow's fragile peace rested. Elias Morven, the septuagenarian healer, was one of them. His hands, gnarled with age, possessed a strange efficacy, tending to ailments deemed incurable by outside physicians. He often spoke of whispers from the soil, claiming these ethereal murmurs guided his concoctions, bringing forth cures from the very earth that cradled the village. He had been the primary proponent of the pact, his conviction born from a deep, unsettling connection to the land. Agnes Wren, a midwife whose gentle hands had welcomed every child born in Dunwallow for generations, stood as the children's guardian. At 66, her gaze was sharp, her demeanor firm. She believed that knowledge was a trigger, a potent force that, if mishandled, could unleash unforeseen dangers. The pact, she insisted, was not merely a set of prohibitions but a shield, a necessary protection for the innocent. It was Agnes who oversaw the solemn rituals of initiation, ensuring that every child, upon reaching the age where letters coalesced into meaning, understood the gravity of their village's existence. Thorne Calder, an octogenarian ex-pastor, carried the indelible mark of excommunication from the wider church, a consequence of his perceived heretical behavior. In Dunwallow, however, he was revered, the appointed guardian of the village crypt. Within its cold, stone heart rested an ancient letter, sealed with a brittle crimson wax. Thorne himself had penned its contents, an arcane warning, and had personally ensured its perpetual concealment. His life was a silent vigil over this forbidden missive. Killian Hawke, the village's 73-year-old botanist and alchemist, spent his days among the peculiar fungi and root systems that thrived only in Dunwallow's immediate vicinity. His meticulous studies had uncovered a terrifying truth. The very soil of Dunwallow possessed a violent, almost sentient reaction to anything buried within its depths. It was Killian who, with a scholar's precision, had drafted the second most critical rule of the pact, a desperate measure against the earth's volatile temperament. Moira Dean, a widow of 69, bore the heavy mantle of a seer. Since the tender age of 12, she claimed to have been plagued by vivid, terrifying dreams of the thing under the earth. These visions, fragments of a subterranean horror, were meticulously documented in a series of small, red-covered notebooks, each painstakingly hand-stitched. These grim journals were not kept in her home but were, paradoxically, buried deep within the village woods, a silent testament to her unsettling prophecies. And finally, Gareth Bell, the village chronicler, a man of 61 years and a distant ancestor to the young Martha Bell. His duty was the meticulous recording of Dunwallow's history, its triumphs, and its tragedies, all meticulously inscribed within a heavy, leather-bound book. This chronicle, kept under lock and key, served as the village's collective memory, a tangible record of its unique heritage. However, the book itself had vanished without a trace in the very year the village founders, those who had first conceived of the pact, had passed from this world. It was these 6, united by a shared, profound understanding of the peril that lay beneath their feet, who had, in a moment of desperate foresight, sealed the pact. A sacred covenant, its purpose was singular and absolute, to protect Dunwallow from that which resonates beneath the earth. The terms were simple, yet unyielding, etched into the very fabric of daily life, recited and reinforced with every passing generation. The first rule, a nocturnal decree, was clear. No one, under any circumstance, was to venture outside their dwelling after the stroke of midnight and before the first blush of dawn. The hours of deepest darkness belonged not to humanity, but to the unseen forces that stirred just beyond the threshold of perception. The second rule, born from Killian Hawke's chilling discoveries, forbade any interment within Dunwallow's sacred ground. No grave was to be dug, no object was to be interred. The soil, they had learned, was not merely earth, it was a volatile, living entity, and to disturb it with the act of burial was to invite a wrath beyond comprehension. The third, and perhaps most terrifying, injunction concerned the crypt and its sealed secret. The letter within was never, under any circumstances, to be opened or read. Thorne Calder's somber warnings had impressed upon all the catastrophic consequences of such a transgression, a knowledge too dangerous for mortal minds to bear. Every child, upon reaching the age of literacy, underwent a solemn initiation. It was Agnes Wren who, with a mixture of sternness and profound care, guided them through the process. The act of learning to read was intertwined with the understanding of these three absolute rules. The letters on the page became not just symbols, but the very warnings that preserved their lives. They were taught not to question, but to obey, becoming an inseparable, silent part of the pact, their innocence now burdened with a terrible, inherited knowledge. For decades, this intricate web of prohibitions held Dunwallow in a state of fragile equilibrium. A pervasive, artificial peace settled over the village, a quietude born not of tranquility, but of constant vigilance. The air itself seemed to hum with an unspoken tension, a silent acknowledgment that the peace was merely a veneer, and that the ancient terror, held at bay by the pact, was merely dormant, waiting for the inevitable moment when the rules would be broken, and the earth would finally claim its due. The pact, a desperate measure forged by the elders of Dunwallow in the shadow of unspeakable losses, had been etched into the very fabric of the village's existence. Elias Morven, the healer whose remedies often seemed to defy earthly explanation, had proposed its dire terms, his voice raspy with the weight of unseen burdens. Agnes Wren, the stern but protective midwife, had long warned that knowledge was a trigger, and the pact a shield. Thorne Calder, the excommunicated pastor, had sealed its most forbidden secrets within the crypt. Killian Hawke, the botanist, had discerned the earth's violent reactions to intrusion, leading to the strictures against burial. Moira Dean, the seer, had seen the horror beneath the soil in her dreams. And Gareth Bell, the chronicler, had watched his ancestral village descend into a new kind of silence. For decades, a fragile peace held, a testament to fear. The first tremor of true terror, the initial crack in Dunwallow's forced tranquility, arrived in 1931. Thomas Keane, the village blacksmith, a man of 42 years whose hands were more accustomed to shaping metal than defying ancient warnings, became the unwitting architect of his own demise. Grief had a way of blurring the edges of caution. His wife, gone too soon, had left behind a small, tarnished silver medal, a trinket Thomas cherished above all else. Driven by a sorrow that eclipsed prudence, he chose to inter this memento near the central oak, its roots a gnarled monument in the village square. It was a simple act, a quiet expression of love and loss, yet it was a direct violation of Rule 2, a dictate Killian Hawke had so carefully penned, forbidding the burial of anything within the village bounds. 3 days later, the morning sun cast long, unsettling shadows across Dunwallow. Thomas Keane was discovered at the base of the very tree where he had committed his transgression. His body was inverted, legs pointing skyward, head driven into the earth. The silver medal, his wife's cherished keepsake, was found embedded deep within his throat, a macabre and impossible obstruction. No cries had been heard, no struggle discerned. The village had slept through his final, agonizing moments, waking only to a scene of profound and chilling horror. The silence that followed his discovery was not merely the absence of sound, it was the oppressive quiet of a community gripped by a terror it barely understood, a terror that now had a name: consequence. 3 years later, in 1934, the village's fragile sense of security was shattered anew, this time by a different kind of breach. Martha Bell, a girl of only 11, a student with a bright curiosity that often led her beyond the confines of her lessons, became another victim of the pact's unforgiving nature. Her beloved ginger cat, a creature of habit and comfort, had vanished. As the village clock chimed 1 in the morning, a time when all good children were meant to be safely asleep, Martha slipped from her small cottage, a lantern clutched in her trembling hand. Her desperate search for her pet, a child's innocent act of love, directly defied Rule 1, the draconian decree against venturing outside after midnight. Martha Bell never returned. The initial frantic searches yielded nothing. 7 days of agonizing uncertainty passed. Then, on the 8th morning, a new horror unfolded. On the weathered doorstep of the Bell cottage, a series of footprints appeared, stark against the dew-kissed wood. They were small, distinct, and unmistakably Martha's, yet they were inverted, as if she had walked backward into the void. And they were stained with blood, a faint, unsettling crimson that seemed to pulse in the morning light. The prints led directly to the locked front door, then ceased. The air around the house grew heavy, charged with an unseen presence. And in the dead of night, between the hours of 3 and 4 in the morning, a new phenomenon began. From within Martha's locked bedroom, faint, ethereal whispers could be heard, a sound that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere at once, chilling those who dared to listen. The whispers, though unintelligible, carried a tone of profound distress, a spectral echo of the child who had dared to break the midnight rule. The chilling pattern continued, the village slowly succumbing to a creeping dread. In 1947, 13 years after Martha's disappearance, the cycle of violation and retribution claimed another soul. Albert Rowe, a 55-year-old farmer whose life was intertwined with the very soil he tilled, found himself ensnared by the same rule that had claimed Thomas Keene. His faithful working dog, a companion for over a decade, had finally succumbed to age and illness. Overcome by a deep, quiet grief, Albert made the fateful decision to bury the animal on his own land, a small, private plot near the edge of his fields. It was an act born of sentiment, a final farewell to a loyal friend, but it was a clear and unforgivable transgression of Rule 2. The earth, Killian Hawke had warned, did not tolerate intrusion. 6 days after the burial, Albert Rowe began to feel unwell. A profound weakness settled into his limbs, a leaden paralysis that grew with each passing hour. On the 6th day, the farmer was found in his bed, his body contorted, rigid. He had suffocated, choked by his own vomit, his eyes wide with a terror that suggested a desperate, futile struggle. The peculiar horror of his death was the absolute stillness of his form. It was clear he had been utterly unable to move, trapped within his own body as the life drained from him. The cumulative weight of these events pressed down upon Dunwallow. Each death, each disappearance, each inexplicable horror, served as a brutal reminder of the Pact's unforgiving nature. The villagers, once merely fearful, now lived under a shroud of constant apprehension. The rules, once abstract warnings, had become tangible, deadly realities. The whispers from Martha's room, the impossible inverted footprints, the chilling discovery of Thomas Keene, the suffocating stillness of Albert Rowe, these were not isolated tragedies but connected threads in a tapestry of terror woven by their own collective defiance. The understanding settled in, cold and inescapable. The pact was not a suggestion. It was a lethal decree, enforced by an unseen, unyielding power that resided beneath the very ground they walked upon. The village held its breath, waiting for the next transgression, the next inevitable consequence. The most audacious and perilous breaches of the Dunwallow Pact invariably involved the third rule, the unread letter, sealed within the crypt, a cryptic warning from Thorn Calder's hand. This ancient decree, whispered through generations, spoke of unspeakable consequences for any who dared to pry open its secrets. The village, steeped in its peculiar traditions, held a profound, almost religious, dread for the crypt and its contents, a fear carefully cultivated by the elders, particularly Thorn Calder himself, the excommunicated pastor who had penned the very words that promised such terror. In the year 1937, a stark and brutal lesson was delivered concerning the sanctity of this rule. Richard Lyle, a man of 68 years, once a respected priest, had become consumed by a fervent, almost pathological, desire to expose what he believed to be the fabricated nature of the pact. His obsession had festered, eroding his spiritual conviction and replacing it with a cynical, dangerous curiosity. During a somber Sunday sermon, held within the chilling confines of the village crypt, a place usually reserved for solemn remembrance, Richard Lyle made his move. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and aged stone, seemed to press down on the gathered faithful. His voice, usually sonorous and comforting, had taken on a brittle edge in recent weeks, laced with an unsettling fervor. With a deliberate, almost defiant gesture, Richard Lyle produced the ancient, wax-sealed envelope from its place of rest. A collective gasp rippled through the small congregation, a sound quickly stifled by a profound, paralyzing dread. The flickering lamplight cast long, dancing shadows across the faces of those assembled, illuminating their wide, fearful eyes. Richard Lyle's aged fingers, surprisingly steady, broke the brittle, crimson seal. The faint, almost imperceptible whisper of parchment unfolding filled the tomb-like silence. He held the letter aloft, its script ancient and unfamiliar, then began to read its contents aloud. The words themselves, though unintelligible to the listeners, seemed to suck the very warmth from the air, a chilling resonance echoing off the cold stone walls. The transformation was immediate, sickeningly swift. Richard Lyle's face, a moment before etched with determined defiance, contorted into a mask of unimaginable horror. His eyes, fixed on the ancient script, began to darken, the whites rapidly consumed by an inky blackness until they were twin voids reflecting no light, no life. A low, wet gurgle escaped his throat, and then, from deep within his ears, a thick, viscous stream of black blood began to flow, tracing grotesque paths down his pallid cheeks, soaking the collar of his clerical vestments. He crumpled to the floor, a lifeless husk, his limbs twisted at unnatural angles, the unread letter still clutched in his blackened hand. The congregants, paralyzed by the sudden grotesque spectacle, could only stare, their minds struggling to comprehend the horror that had unfolded before their very eyes. A primal, instinctual terror seized them, driving any lingering skepticism from their minds. With trembling, desperate hands, they retrieved the cursed letter, hastily resealing it with fresh wax, their movements frantic, desperate to contain the evil it exuded. From that day forward, no one dared to even glance at the crypt's forbidden contents. The memory of Richard Lyle's horrific demise etched irrevocably into the village's collective consciousness. Thorne Calder's grim warning, so carefully enshrined, had been validated with a terrifying finality. 16 years later, the village of Dunwallow, though scarred by past events, continued its uneasy existence under the shadow of the pact. The fear of the crypt remained, a constant, unspoken undercurrent in their daily lives. Yet, the innocence of childhood, unburdened by the weight of history, often proved a dangerous vulnerability. In 1953, the village was reminded of the pact's indiscriminate cruelty through the fate of Amelia Ward, a girl of only 7 years. Her mind, brimming with the boundless curiosity typical of her age, found itself drawn to the forbidden. Perhaps she had heard hushed whispers of the crypt, or perhaps the sheer mystique of the sealed chamber, known to every child in Dunwallow, proved too great a temptation. Agnes Wren, the village midwife and guardian of children, who often spoke of knowledge being a trigger and the pact of protection, might have inadvertently fueled this innocent curiosity through her very warnings. Amelia, driven by an innocent desire to understand, found a way into the crypt, her small hands reaching for the ancient letter. What transpired in those moments remained unseen, a private horror. She did not read it aloud, perhaps only tracing the strange symbols with her tiny fingers, but the mere attempt, the innocent transgression, was enough. A subtle shift occurred within her over the next 5 days. Her bright, inquisitive eyes began to lose their sparkle, replaced by a distant, vacant glaze. Her playful laughter subsided, replaced by long stretches of unsettling silence. The villagers, used to the subtle signs of the pact's influence, watched her with growing apprehension, a chilling premonition settling over them. On the 5th night after her transgression, as the clock tower chimed midnight, a chilling spectacle unfolded. Amelia Ward, a fragile, childlike figure, was seen wandering naked across the slate roof of the village schoolhouse, her small body silhouetted against the pale moonlight. Her eyes, wide and unnaturally bright, reflected the distant stars, fixed on some unseen point in the void. From her lips a repetitive, hollow whisper escaped, carried on the cool night air. "It wasn't for me. It wasn't for me." The words, devoid of emotion, seemed to echo the pact's cold, unyielding judgment. Villagers, roused by the strange, mournful sound, emerged from their homes, their faces etched with dawning horror. They watched, helpless, as the tiny figure moved with an unnatural, somnambulistic grace across the perilous incline. Then, without a sound, she stumbled, a small, dark shape plummeting from the roof's edge, meeting the unforgiving earth below with a final, sickening thud. The consistency of the punishment for the violation of Rule 3, irrespective of age, intention, or the extent of the transgression, solidified the profound terror that the letter and that which resonates beneath the earth inspired in Dunwallow. Richard Lyle's grotesque, instantaneous demise, and Amelia Ward's slow, agonizing descent into madness before her fatal fall, served as grim, undeniable proof. The Pact's wrath was absolute, unyielding, and utterly merciless. The sealed letter remained in the crypt, a silent, malevolent guardian, its unread words a constant, chilling reminder of the dangers lurking beneath the ancient soil of Dunwallow. The village lived, and died, by its rules. The years passed in Dunwallow like the slow creep of shadows across the moor, each one adding another layer of quiet dread to the village's already heavy air. The Pact, once a desperate measure, had solidified into an inescapable truth, its rules etched not just in stone, but into the very fabric of existence within the valley. Though the most recent brutal lessons had instilled a profound fear, the insidious pull of human nature, or perhaps the sheer weight of circumstance, occasionally tested the village's fragile resolve. In the year 1942, the chilling hand of the Pact reached out once more, finding its next unwitting subject in Nora Finn. A seamstress of 19 summers, Nora was known for her quiet diligence, her nimble fingers weaving intricate patterns into fabric. Yet, a longing for connection, a desire for a life beyond the confines of Dunwallow's silent streets, led her to stray from the rigid path laid out by the elders. Her heart, young and hopeful, beat for a boy from a neighboring village, a world away from the pervasive gloom that clung to her home. One crisp autumn night, long after the moon had climbed to its zenith and the village lay deep in slumber, Nora Finn slipped from her modest cottage. It was well past midnight, the hour when the veil between worlds thinned, the forbidden time when the first rule of the Pact, the one concerning departure after the hour of 12, became a fatal snare. Her destination, a clandestine meeting with her beloved, sealed her fate with every hushed step she took into the oppressive darkness. The following morning, a search party, their faces etched with a familiar, weary apprehension, discovered her. She was found in the old abandoned shed at the edge of the village, a structure long since given over to rot and cobwebs. The scene was one of profound, inexplicable horror. Nora Finn lay upon the dusty floor, her body untouched by physical violence, yet her eyes were wide, fixed in an unblinking stare of pure, unadulterated terror. They seemed to gaze at something unseen, something so utterly horrifying that it had stolen her very breath. A local physician, summoned with grim urgency, examined her lifeless form. His findings were baffling, unsettling in their simplicity. Nora Finn's heart had simply stopped. There were no signs of struggle, no wounds, no discernible cause of death beyond the profound, paralyzing fear that had gripped her in her final moments. The silence that followed this discovery was heavier than ever, a testament to the unseen forces that governed Dunwallow. 16 years later, in the year 1958, the village had settled into an uneasy truce with its unseen master. The incidents had become less frequent, perhaps due to the profound lessons learned, or perhaps because the thing that resonates beneath the earth simply chose its moments with a terrifying, deliberate patience. Yet, the Pact, though unspoken in daily conversation, remained a suffocating presence, a silent warden over every soul. It was in this atmosphere of strained calm that Walter Dorn, a man of 36, found himself caught in the ancient web. Like many in Dunwallow, Walter sought solace in the small, mundane rituals of life, a brief escape from the oppressive quiet. His habit was a nightly smoke, a moment of contemplation under the vast, indifferent sky. One night, as the clock in the village square chimed 2 in the morning, Walter Dorn stepped out into the frigid air, a wisp of smoke already curling from his lips. His wife, a woman accustomed to the subtle sounds of their small home, stirred momentarily in her sleep, a subconscious awareness of his brief absence. Then, a sound pierced the night, sharp and agonizing, a single piercing scream that tore through the quiet, a sound of utter despair and terror. It was Walter's voice, a sound that would forever haunt the waking hours of his wife. She bolted upright, her heart hammering against her ribs, and rushed to the front door, flinging it open into the inky blackness. What she found there was not Walter, but a scene of chilling, meticulous precision. His clothes, the very garments he had worn moments before, lay on the cold ground, folded with an almost unnatural neatness. His trousers, his shirt, even his socks, arranged as if laid out for inspection. Beside this unsettling display, a dark, viscous pool stained the earth, a stark testament to a sudden, violent end. It was unmistakably blood, fresh and abundant. Yet, there was no body. No trace of Walter Dorn remained. save for the neatly folded garments and the sanguine puddle. It was as if he had simply vanished, consumed by the very air, leaving behind only the chilling evidence of his final, terrifying moments. Since that night in 1958, an unnatural stillness had descended upon Dunwallow. No further rules of the pact had been overtly broken, or at least, no new violations had resulted in such public and terrifying disappearances or deaths. The village existed in a state of suspended animation, a delicate balance between a fragile peace and an ever-present dread. The rules, though no longer enforced by the immediate threat of new casualties, had never been officially revoked. They hung over the village like a perpetual, unseen shroud. Some of the villagers, those with the courage or the desperation to seek a different life, had packed their meager belongings and departed, leaving the oppressive quiet of Dunwallow behind, their faces pale with unspoken fear. Others, the vast majority, chose to remain, caught in a silent, collective denial. They moved through their days with a forced normalcy, tending to their crops, mending their nets, weaving their cloth, all the while pretending that the pact was nothing more than an ancient, quaint tradition, a forgotten superstition from a darker time. They spoke of the old ways with a detached reverence, never daring to utter the full truth of the terror that lay beneath their feet. Yet, a constant, silent reminder of the pact's enduring power remained. Deep within the ancient, crumbling church, in the crypt guarded for generations by the likes of Thorn Calder, the letter written by the excommunicated pastor himself lay undisturbed. It was still sealed, its contents a forbidden truth, a testament to the pact's terrifying origins and its unyielding grip on Dunwallow. The villagers knew its presence, a silent, dark heart beating beneath their fragile peace. And some say the seal is cracked again. The chilling saga of Dunwallow leaves us with a profound disquiet. It's not just the grisly fates of those who defied the rules that haunt us, but the very nature of those rules themselves. Were they merely superstitious quirks, or a fragile, painstakingly crafted pact with an ancient, malevolent force? Perhaps the true horror lies not in the thing under the earth, but in the desperate human need to understand, to challenge, to rebel, when blind obedience was the only safeguard against oblivion. This unsettling glimpse into Dunwallow's past begs us to ponder. Is ignorance truly bliss, or simply a temporary shield against a terrifying truth? If presented with rules so strange, so absolute, yet seemingly vital for survival, would your curiosity outweigh your fear? Share your deepest thoughts on the enigmatic pact of Dunwallow in the comments below. We're eager to hear your theories. And if you're drawn to the shadows and the mysteries they hold, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more tales from the forgotten archives.